Hi there, with me is Charles Raven. He's the Membership Development Secretary for Gafcon, and we've got a stack of questions to put to you, Charles. I want you to take me back, though, to 10 years ago, to 2008, and you were here in Jerusalem.
Yep.
And, there's almost 2,000 people here this week, but there was just over 1,000 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And just take me back to the emotion, what was going on in people's heads. Give us the word picture of a decade ago.
It was one of the most outstanding experiences of my life. I was leading a church in England where we'd taken a costly stand for the gospel, which had meant that we had lost our church building. I had lost my employment in the Church of England. I'd lost my home. But then coming here to Jerusalem...
Well, let's just unpack that a little bit.
Right.
You were a Church of England minister.
Yeah.
And you were fired.
Yes. Yeah.
You were banned, like you had the keys to the building taken off you.
Yeah, I had to surrender them. I had a letter telling me I would be prosecuted if I continued to minister
walk onto that property.
In that parish church. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you seem like quite a nice man to me. What happened?
We had a bishop in Worcester Diocese in England who was a strong proponent, a strong advocate for the Christian, lesbian, gay Christian movement. He had been very disappointed that the 1998 Lambeth Conference of Bishops had reaffirmed the biblical understanding of sexuality and marriage. Shortly afterwards, he went public and described that 1998 Lambeth Conference as being like a Nazi Nuremberg rally, and said that those who'd voted for the orthodox position, which was the vast majority of the conference, were a manifestation of the demonic powers and principalities of Ephesians 6:12.
Right.
And I'm not making this up. You know, this was actually in a church newspaper in February 1999. So we felt that we could not continue to receive his ministry.
And first step was to not have him come and officiate at confirmation, but rather have some Ugandan bishops come and officiate at confirmation. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And that was quite controversial in the news, the media, all those kind of things at the time.
Yeah.
What happened then? What were the steps to being evicted? Yeah.
We carried on as normally as we could, but we got to the point where my licence as a minister came to an end, and I was advised, I had legal advice that I should seek to carry on because the bishop of the diocese had gone so far from the teaching of Scripture that it was actually my duty to stay where I was because we were the ones who were being faithful to Anglican teaching.
You were with the Bible, you were with the 39 Articles.
That's right, yeah. But then I got a letter telling me that I would be prosecuted if I carried on in the church. So it was very clear that we were actually being thrown out because I did not want to leave the Church of England because I believed and still believe all that the Church of England formally stands for. But we had a bishop who didn't. That was our dilemma. So at the point where we got a letter where it was absolutely clear that we were we had to go, then most of the congregation and I carried on as an Anglican church, but outside of the structures of the Church of England.
Now, I do a program back in Sydney called The Pastor's Heart, and I ask the people I'm talking to about what God was doing in your heart in that difficult season of life that you went through. Tell me what God was doing in your heart during that. I mean, it must have been an extraordinary emotional journey for you, your family.
Yeah, it was stressful, and there were lots of practical decisions that had to be made about where we were going to live and where the church would meet, and would there be a stipend, would there be a salary that was sufficient. But all I can say is that through that experience, I hardly ever failed to sleep at night And there was a sense of what the Apostle Paul calls the peace that passes all understanding. And there was a deep determination in my heart that I was going to see this through, and that the Lord would open a way for us, even when we couldn't see it. And he did. And the effect on our family life was actually very positive, because our children, who were in their between 14 and 10 at that time, realised what was going on and saw God's provision, and they have all grown into strong, committed believers, married, bringing up Christian families. So it was an important experience of God's faithfulness.
And they saw mum and dad making costly decisions for Jesus.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes wonder when I look around congregations and parents are wondering and worrying about their whether or not their children will keep going in the faith, but they haven't themselves made costly decisions for Christ. They haven't modelled a costly Christianity. But to come back to where we started, you came to Gafcon 2008, and you discovered there were other people in the same situation that you'd been through.
So I think one of the most difficult things is when you sense that you're isolated, and there are other people who say that they believe the same things but don't act in the same way. And you can begin to wonder, am I just a bit cross-grained? But then to be here with over 1,000 other people who understood the same gospel issues that were at stake was enormously encouraging. Because we did feel isolated in the new church that was formed. It was sometimes hard going. England is a difficult place to witness and to see church growth. There are discouragements, but to be together and know that you're not alone is a wonderfully inspiring thing.
Tell us about these networks.
Well, we're setting up 9 networks altogether. Perhaps it would not be appropriate to list.
No, let's do it. Because we've got a couple of minutes. We've got theological education. That's a big one, isn't it?
Yes.
And you've got theological educators here from every continent.
That's right. And there's a great wealth of expertise and experience that can be shared, and with the resources that modern technology gives us, it's then possible to bring good teaching to every part of the communion.
We'll keep going. Church planting.
Church planting is a great strategy for church growth. Sometimes in the West we find that it's easier, as they say, to give birth than to raise the dead. Sometimes you actually need new initiatives. Whereas in the global South, where the churches are growing rapidly, church planting becomes necessary just so that people are properly pastored and evangelism can keep moving forward. And there's a lot that we can learn from one another cross-culturally as well.
Now the Global Mission Partnerships one, it's really about just seeing more evangelism happen.
Yes, that's right.
Tell us about that.
Well, global mission is a response to globalization, where we find that there are huge population shifts, and many parts of the world are becoming much more multicultural. So we've already seen this happening in North and South America. There's a movement called Caminemos Juntos, which is an outreach to Hispanics, where Christians from South America are reaching Hispanic people in North America. Caminemos Juntos in Spanish means, for those of you who don't know Spanish, it means
I don't know Spanish.
means walking together.
Yep.
So it's seeing how from our different cultures we can complement and encourage one another in effective evangelism. And for instance, in the UK, it can be a great encouragement to have brothers and sisters from South America or from Africa coming to just help us with mission and outreach.
And I'm looking at the various leaders of these networks. Some of the leaders are from the UK, but others are from Africa, others from Australia, or others from America, others from Canada. It really is. I mean, it's quite globally diverse.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about the Anglican Communion when it's working properly. We get great diversity, but there is unity in the truth of the gospel, because the gospel is true for all people, at all times, and in all places. So this is how we express that truth of the gospel, but in the great diversity that God is bringing together here in Jerusalem and going forward.
Now, one of the things that shocked me, and I've only heard this in the last 24 hours or so, and we mentioned it in another briefer interview, is that there are moves by Canterbury to squash these networks. It just seems unfathomable to me that if you've got theological educators wanting to meet together, or you've got evangelists wanting to meet together, or you've got church planners wanting to meet together. Have I got it wrong? Tell me I've got it wrong.
I've actually seen a letter that was sent from the Secretary General of the Anglican Communion, Bishop Josiah Idowu-Fearon, to the Gafcon primates, and he's asking them not to encourage these networks and not to allow their provinces to be involved, because, he says, anything like this should come from Canterbury. But this is really quite astonishing, because the Anglican Communion is not like the Roman Catholic Church. It's a family of autonomous provinces, and so for Canterbury to be trying to organise things at that kind of level really is a very alarming development, and a level of control and interference that is really quite unprecedented.
I guess there's all sorts of levels of alarm and pushback one wants to raise at this point. One of which is, the reason I take it you're doing it is because you think the networks that Gafcon will set up have a particular theological credibility, whereas the networks that are going to be set up by Canterbury are going to have a different theological emphasis. Is that right?
Well, and this goes to the heart of the difference between us. Gafcon is a movement of renewal and reform within the Anglican Communion. We're very definitely within the Communion. We're not trying to start something new. But we're saying that what makes you Anglican, and this was the great thing about 2008, 10 years ago, it was this clarification that what makes you Anglican is not first and foremost recognition by the Archbishop of Canterbury, but the faith that we confess. And these networks are coming together on that common basis. But what I think lies behind the Secretary General's remarks and his letter to the primates is that he sees Anglicanism as an institution. This is a club to which you belong.
And I hold the keys.
That's right. And it doesn't go beyond Canterbury. Everything should centre around that. Now, there's a lot to give thanks for in the past, for the Church of England, for the missionary impulse that came from England in the 19th and 20th centuries. But now we have a problem, because leadership in a global communion should be following the example of the Good Shepherd, who laid down his life for the sheep. There is a need for pastors at the highest level to protect the flock. But that is a fundamental failure of the traditional leadership, as led by not only this Archbishop of Canterbury, but his two predecessors as well, that they have failed to exercise the necessary discipline that we need to maintain the clarity and certainty of Christian witness in the communion. So we are told that we must walk together with people who have clearly rejected the teaching of Scripture on marriage and sexuality, the teaching of Jesus himself.
Well. Yeah.
But yes, that is just the presenting issue. Underneath that is what we described in 2008 in the Jerusalem Statement and Declaration as a false gospel. Now, if you are saying that what the Bible calls sin is actually holy, and if you are saying that we can reject the clear teaching of Scripture as it's been held from 2,000 years, then you have lost the foundation. And that makes the Anglican Communion, as represented by its traditional leadership, no longer a safe place for Christians who still are confident in the teaching of the Bible and want to clear witness to Jesus.
So these networks are aiming to be a safe place.
That's right, yeah.
Let me just, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the mentality of those people in Canterbury who are thinking like that. And I mean, we've just seen in the Commonwealth, we've watched with Her Majesty no longer being the secretary or the convener of the Commonwealth, but that role going to Charles.
Yes.
And we've just, I mean, I was actually surprised that it was something that they did actually have to vote on.
Yeah.
In that I just had assumed it was a succession thing appointed by Her Majesty.
Yeah.
But it's just got me thinking about the parallels between the Commonwealth and the Anglican Church. And it just seems to me that there are, there's a mindset of colonialism in Canterbury, really. You know, that, and whereas where I sit in Sydney, Australia, I think, well, what we're about is preaching Christ. That's the thing that matters. What we're about is faithfulness to the Scriptures. That's the thing that matters. We've not got some allegiance to some kind of post-colonial 19th century institution.
Well, I have to say that as an Englishman who has great affection for the royal family, for our historic institutions and for the Commonwealth, this pains me very deeply to see these historic institutions being now used to undermine the very basis out of which they came into being. And
what we want to see from our church leaders is boldly proclaiming Christ and standing up for Jesus, and not kind of clutching at straws around a false gospel.
No. Well, again, the Jerusalem Statement and Declaration of 10 years ago spoke of the devastating conclusion, that's the words of the statement, not my words, the devastating conclusion that we are a global communion with colonial structures. And so what Gafcon is doing is reasserting the centrality of the gospel and of witness to Jesus. That declaration ends with the words that we have come together in Jerusalem to ensure a clear and certain witness to Jesus Christ. So much as I have affection for the monarchy and the Commonwealth, all of us know that the gospel must come first. And the Anglican Communion must stand for something more than being the high watermark, as it were, of the British Empire. It's got to have an identity which is formed and shaped by the gospel, not by the particular needs of the Church of England,
softly pushing
in
British.
a very secular culture.
Well, Charles Raven has been my guest. He is the Membership Development Secretary of Gafcon, and his responsibility this week is, well, keeping an eye on membership all around, but his particular focus is working on the networks that are going to flow out of this week in Jerusalem.